The dust-laden wind carried the sound of the approaching stagecoach long before it came into view, the distant rumble echoing across the vast Montana plains like a promise. June 1875 had brought relentless heat to Virginia City, Montana Territory, and the wooden sign marking the town's entrance swung rhythmically with each gust, as if waving to the newcomers. Standing on the weathered platform of the stage depot, Rosston Reed pulled his hat lower to shield his eyes, scanning the horizon for the first glimpse of what might be his future or his biggest mistake. The advertisement had been simple enough. Montana rancher seeks bride of good character and sturdy constitution. Passage paid. His friends had laughed at his decision to send for a mail-order bride. But after 5 years of solitude on his growing cattle ranch, the emptiness of his home had become unbearable. His land was thriving, his cattle multiplying, but Rosston had begun to wonder what it was all for if there was no one to share it with. The stagecoach appeared finally, a plume of dust rising behind it as the driver urged the horses toward town. Rosston's mouth went dry. What kind of woman would travel thousands of miles to marry a stranger? He'd been honest in his letters about his ranch, his modest success, his hopes for a family, but words on paper couldn't prepare either of them for the reality they were about to face. The coach lurched to a stop, and the driver jumped down to open the door. "Virginia City," he called out. "End of the line." A single passenger emerged, and Rosston felt his heart stutter in his chest. She was smaller than he'd expected her brown traveling dress dusty from the journey. She wore a simple bonnet that had seen better days, and she clutched a worn carpet bag in one hand while the other held onto the stagecoach for support as she found her footing. "Miss Abernathy," Rosston called, taking a hesitant step forward. The young woman turned, her blue eyes finding his. "Mr. Reid," she responded, her voice soft but clear. Rosston nodded, closing the distance between them and offering an awkward bow. "Rosston Reed, madam. Welcome to Virginia City." "Josephine Abernathy," she replied, attempting a curtsy that was hindered by her bag. "But please call me Josie." Up close, Rosston could see the exhaustion etched in her face. She couldn't have been more than 20, with delicate features that seemed at odds with the harsh frontier landscape around them. Her fair skin was flushed from the heat, and wisps of auburn hair had escaped her bonnet, framing her face. "Let me take that for you," he said, reaching for her bag. "Thank you." Josie relinquished her carpet bag, revealing it was her only possession. "I'm afraid I don't have much. Just some clothes and a few keepsakes." Rosston glanced around, expecting to see trunks being unloaded, but there were none. "Is this all you've brought with you?" A flicker of embarrassment crossed her face. "Yes. I'm sorry if that's disappointing. I didn't have the means to bring more." Rosston realized his mistake immediately. No, it's not disappointing at all. I just wanted to make sure we didn't leave anything behind." The stagecoach driver tipped his hat to Josie. "Safe journey to you, madam. Hope Montana treats you well." As the coach pulled away, Rosston and Josie stood in awkward silence, the reality of their situation settling around them like the dust from the departing wheels. "I expect you're tired from your journey," Rosston said finally. "I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. I thought you might want to rest before." He trailed off, not knowing how to refer to their impending marriage. "That's very kind of you," Josie replied, relief evident in her voice. "The journey was longer than I anticipated. From Pennsylvania, wasn't it?" "Yes, Philadelphia." She glanced around at the rough-hewn buildings and unpaved streets of Virginia City. "This is quite different." Rosston felt a twinge of worry. What had he done, bringing this refined young woman to such a place? "It's not much compared to a city, I know, but it's a good community." Folks look out for each other here." They began walking toward the center of town, Rosston conscious of keeping a respectful distance. "Mr. Reed," Josie began. "Rosston, please," she nodded. "Rosston, I want to be honest with you. I came here with nothing but hope. My circumstances in Philadelphia became difficult after my parents passed. This opportunity seemed like providence." Rosston stopped walking and turned to face her. "Hope is all I need too, Miss Abernathy. That and a willingness to build something together." He managed a smile. "My ranch isn't fancy, but it's good land with good water. I can promise you'll never go hungry, and I'll work every day to make sure you don't regret your decision." For the first time, Josie truly smiled, and something in Rosston's chest tightened at the sight. "Then I think we have a fair beginning, Mr. Reed Rosston." They continued walking, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows ahead of them. Josie's eyes widened as they passed the various establishments: the assay office, the general store, a saloon with piano music spilling from its doors. "The town's grown considerably in the last few years," Rosston explained. "The gold rush brought folks here, but it's cattle and commerce keeping it alive now. And your ranch is far from town, about an hour's ride. It's in a valley with a creek running through it. Good grazing land." Rosston found himself eager to show her his home. "I built the house myself. It's not large, but there's room to add on." They reached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, a neat two-story building with curtained windows and flower boxes. Compared to some of the rougher structures in town, it projected an air of respectability that Rosston hoped would put Josie at ease. Mrs. Holloway herself answered the door, a plump woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "So this is your bride-to-be, Mr. Reed," she said, looking Josie up and down. "Poor thing looks ready to drop. Come in, come in." The interior of the boarding house was clean and modestly furnished, the smell of baking bread filling the air. Josie seemed to relax slightly as they entered the parlor. "I've put her in the blue room upstairs," Mrs. Holloway informed Rosston. "Dinner's at 6 sharp. Pastor Evans can come by tomorrow morning if you're still set on getting married right away." Rosston glanced at Josie, suddenly uncertain. Perhaps Miss Abernathy might want some time to be sure. Josie turned to him, her exhaustion evident but determination in her eyes. "I made my decision before I boarded the stagecoach in Philadelphia, Mr. Reed. Unless you've changed your mind." "No," he said quickly. "No, I haven't changed my mind." Mrs. Holloway looked between them with approval. "Well then, tomorrow it is. Now, Miss Abernathy, let's get you settled." She took Josie's arm gently. "Mr. Reed can call on you after dinner, once you've had a chance to rest and freshen up." Rosston reluctantly handed over Josie's carpet bag. "I'll come back at 7 if that's acceptable," Josie nodded. "I look forward to it." As Mrs. Holloway led Josie upstairs, Rosston stood in the parlor, his hat in his hands, wondering at the turn his life had taken. He'd expected to feel relief that his bride had arrived safely, perhaps satisfaction that she seemed kind and proper. He hadn't expected the strange flutter in his chest when she smiled, or the immediate desire to protect her from the hardships of frontier life. With a nod to the empty room, Rosston placed his hat back on his head and stepped out into the street. He had errands to run, things to prepare. Tomorrow he would be a married man, the blue room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a rocking chair by the window. Josie sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, trying to process everything that had happened since stepping off the stagecoach. Rosston Reed was not what she had expected. In her mind, she'd pictured someone older, rougher, a desperate man seeking any woman willing to endure frontier life. Instead, she'd found a man perhaps in his late 20s, tall and broad-shouldered from physical labor, but with gentle eyes and a careful manner. His sun-browned face had been clean-shaven, his clothes worn but tidy. He'd looked at her with such concern when he realized she had only one small bag. Josie opened her carpet bag and removed her few possessions. 3 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a nightgown, a hairbrush, and a small wooden box containing her mother's cameo brooch and her father's pocket watch. At the bottom of the bag was a worn Bible and a packet of letters, her correspondence with Rosston over the past 3 months. She reread his last letter, noting the steady handwriting and straightforward language. He'd written about spring calving, about repairs to his barn, about planting a vegetable garden. Mundane details that had somehow conveyed more about his character than flowery declarations might have. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Abernathy." "I've brought up some hot water for washing," Mrs. Holloway called. "Thank you," Josie replied, hastily returning the letters to her bag. Mrs. Holloway entered with a steaming pitcher which she poured into the basin. "How are you feeling, my dear? That's quite a journey you've undertaken." "I'm still a bit overwhelmed," Josie admitted. "Everything happened so quickly in Philadelphia, I hardly had time to think." "May I ask what brought you to answer Mr. Reed's advertisement?" The older woman's tone was curious but kind. Josie hesitated. She'd prepared a simplified version of her story for strangers, but something about Mrs. Holloway's maternal manner invited confidence. "My parents died of influenza last winter. There was nothing left after the debts were paid. I was working as a seamstress, but the wages barely covered my room and board." She looked down at her hands. "Then my employer's son became persistent in his attentions. When I refused him, I lost my position." Mrs. Holloway's face softened with sympathy. "I see, and with no family to turn to." "No, I saw Mr. Reed's advertisement in the newspaper. His letters seemed honest and he offered to pay my passage." Josie managed a small smile. "It felt like my only chance." "Well, you've landed on your feet, my dear. Rosston Reed is one of the good ones. Works hard, doesn't drink to excess, and he's respected in these parts. Built that ranch of his from nothing." Josie felt a knot of tension ease in her chest. "He seems kind." "That he is. Now I'll leave you to freshen up. There's a dress brush in the drawer if you need it, and I can press your dress for tomorrow's ceremony if you like." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I appreciate your kindness." After the older woman left, Josie washed her face and hands in the basin, then loosened her hair from its pins, brushing out the long auburn waves. She changed into her cleanest dress, a simple blue cotton that had faded with washing but was at least intact. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she pinched her pale cheeks for color and practiced a smile. "You can do this, Josephine," she whispered to her reflection. "This is your chance for a new beginning." Dinner at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was a simple but hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Josie shared the table with 3 other boarders: an elderly schoolteacher, a young clerk from the assay office, and a widow who ran the millinery shop. All were curious about the new arrival, but Mrs. Holloway skillfully redirected their more intrusive questions. At 7 o'clock precisely, there was a knock at the front door. Josie's heart quickened as Mrs. Holloway went to answer it. She heard Rosston's deep voice in the entryway, followed by his appearance in the parlor doorway. He changed his clothes, she noticed. His shirt was crisp and white, his vest and jacket brushed free of dust. He'd combed his dark hair and his hat was in his hands, turning nervously. "Good evening, Miss Abernathy," he said. "I hope you were able to rest." Josie rose from her chair. "Yes, thank you. Mrs. Holloway has been very kind. I thought perhaps we might take a short walk, Rosston suggested. The evening's cooled down some, and it might give us a chance to talk before tomorrow. I'd like that. Mrs. Holloway appeared with a shawl. Don't keep her out too late, Mr. Reed. The poor girl's had a long journey. Yes, madam, Rosston agreed with a respectful nod. The air outside had indeed cooled, the sky deepening to purple as the sun set behind the distant mountains. Virginia City was quieter now, though light and activity still spilled from the saloons and the hotel. I hope Mrs. Holloway's accommodations are comfortable, Rosston said as they walked slowly down the boardwalk. Very much so. She's been wonderful. Josie glanced up at him. She speaks highly of you. Rosston's cheeks colored slightly. Mrs. Holloway's known me since I first came to Montana. She tends to see the best in folks. How long have you been here? Nearly 6 years now. Came out after the war with not much more than the clothes on my back and a dream of open spaces. You fought in the war? Josie asked, realizing how little she truly knew about this man she was to marry. Rosston nodded, his expression sobering. With the Union Army, I don't talk about it much. I understand. She hesitated. My father fought as well. He came back changed. Something passed between them, then a shared understanding of loss that needed no elaboration. They walked in silence for a moment before Rosston spoke again. I want you to know, Miss Abernathy, that I don't expect. That is, I hope you'll come to care for me in time, but I understand this arrangement is practical for both of us. I'll never take advantage of your situation. Josie felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration. Thank you, and I hope you'll call me Josie. If we're to be married tomorrow, it seems only right. Josie, he said, testing the name. It suits you. They had reached the end of the main street where the town gave way to open country. The vastness of the landscape spread before them, rolling hills fading into darkness, the distant silhouette of mountains against the star-speckled sky. It's so open, Josie murmured. In Philadelphia, buildings crowd in so close you can barely see the sky sometimes. Does it frighten you? All this space, she considered the question seriously. Not frighten exactly, it's overwhelming but also freeing somehow, like you could breathe deeper here. Rosston smiled, pleased by her answer. That's how I felt when I first saw Montana, like I could finally breathe. He turned to face her. Josie, I want to be honest with you. Life here isn't easy, especially for a woman. The winters are harsh, neighbors are far apart, and there's always more work than hours in the day. But if you're willing to try, I promise to do everything in my power to make a good life for us. Josie met his gaze steadily. I didn't come all this way to give up at the first hardship, Mr. Reed. I may not know much about ranching, but I'm a quick learner and I'm not afraid of hard work. Rosston, he reminded her gently. Rosston, she repeated, the name still unfamiliar on her tongue. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. They turned back toward town, walking slowly as the first stars appeared overhead. Pastor Evans will come to the boarding house at 10 tomorrow, Rosston said. It'll be a simple ceremony, but I've invited a few friends. I hope that's all right. Of course, it's kind of you to think of that. And after, if you're not too tired, I thought we might visit the general store. You'll need some things for the ranch, and I want you to choose what suits you. Josie felt a flush of embarrassment at her dependence. I'm sorry I can't contribute anything. Once I'm settled, perhaps I could find some sewing work. Josie, Rosston interrupted gently. What's mine is yours after tomorrow. There's no need to think of it as charity, and there's plenty of work on the ranch if you're set on contributing. They had reached the boarding house again. Rosston walked her to the door but didn't enter, maintaining the propriety of their arrangement for one more night. Until tomorrow, then, he said, taking her hand briefly. Sleep well, Josie. Good night, Rosston. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Josie felt a curious mixture of anxiety and hope. Tomorrow, she would marry a man she barely knew, in a town thousands of miles from everything familiar. Yet something in Rosston's steady gaze and careful consideration gave her courage. Perhaps, she thought, they might build something real from this practical arrangement. Morning brought clear skies and a flurry of activity to the boarding house. Mrs. Holloway had pressed Josie's best dress, a pale yellow cotton with a lace collar that had been her mother's, and arranged her hair with sprigs of lavender from the garden. The mirror reflected a young woman Josie hardly recognized, her cheeks flushed with nervousness, her blue eyes bright with anticipation. "You make a lovely bride, my dear," Mrs. Holloway said, adjusting the lavender in Josie's auburn waves. "Simple and natural, just right for a country wedding." "Thank you for everything," Josie replied, squeezing the older woman's hand. "I don't know what I would have done without your kindness." "Nonsense. It's a pleasure to see Rosston finally settling down with a good woman." Mrs. Holloway checked the clock on the mantel. Nearly time. Pastor Evans should be arriving soon. The parlor had been transformed for the occasion. Fresh wildflowers adorned the mantel and tables, and the furniture had been rearranged to create a small aisle. Through the window, Josie could see people arriving, a handful of townsfolk dressed in their Sunday best, coming to witness the marriage of the rancher and his mail-order bride. A knock at the front door announced Pastor Evans, a tall man with a silver beard and kind eyes. He greeted Josie with a warm handshake. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Abernathy. Rosston is a fine man. I'm honored to join you both in matrimony." "Thank you, Pastor. I'm grateful for your service." More guests arrived: the local doctor and his wife, the general store owner, a neighboring rancher and his family. Josie stood near the stairs, overwhelmed by the friendly faces and welcoming words. And then Rosston was there, standing in the doorway in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his hat in his hands. Their eyes met across the room, and the noise around them seemed to fade. He looked as nervous as she felt, but when he smiled, something settled in Josie's heart. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They stood before Pastor Evans, Rosston's hand steady as he held hers, his voice clear as he repeated his vows. Josie's own voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was firm. When Rosston slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, he explained in a whisper, tears pricked behind her eyes. "By the authority vested in me," Pastor Evans concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Reed, you may kiss your bride." Rosston hesitated, then leaned down to place a gentle kiss on Josie's lips, brief, respectful, but with a warmth that sent a flutter through her chest. The small gathering applauded, and then they were surrounded by well-wishers, hands reaching to shake Rosston's and pat Josie's arm. Mrs. Holloway had prepared a wedding breakfast: eggs, bacon, fresh biscuits with honey, and a small cake decorated with candied fruit. As they ate, Josie found herself watching Rosston interact with the townspeople, noting how they respected him, how he listened carefully to each person who spoke to him. This was the man she had married, a man of few words but genuine actions, someone who had earned the good opinion of his community. After the guests had departed, Rosston turned to Josie. "If you're ready, I thought we might visit the general store now. Then we can head to the ranch before evening." Reality settled over Josie. This was her life now, following this man to his home, becoming his wife in more than just name. "Yes, I'm ready." They said their goodbyes to Mrs. Holloway, who pressed a package of leftover cake into Josie's hands. "For your first evening at home," she said with a wink. "Come visit whenever you're in town." The general store was a treasure trove of goods, practical necessities alongside small luxuries imported from the East. Mr. Thompson, the proprietor, greeted them warmly. "The new Mrs. Reed, welcome to Virginia City. What can I help you with today?" Rosston turned to Josie. "We need to outfit you for ranch life. Winter clothing, work boots, anything you think you'll need." Josie stared at the array of goods, overwhelmed by her husband's generosity and her own ignorance of what frontier life required. "I'm not sure where to begin." "Allow me to make some suggestions," Mrs. Thompson offered, emerging from the back room. "Every ranch wife needs certain essentials." With Mrs. Thompson's guidance, Josie selected several practical dresses, a heavy winter coat, sturdy boots, woolen stockings, and work gloves. Rosston insisted she also choose items to make their home more comfortable: curtain fabric, a set of china dishes, a colorful quilt for their bed. Each selection was noted in Mr. Thompson's ledger under Rosston's account. "Is there anything else you'd like?" Rosston asked as Mr. Thompson tallied their purchases. "Books, perhaps. I know there's not much entertainment at the ranch." Josie hesitated, eyeing a shelf of books near the counter. "May I have one or two? I've always loved reading." "Of course." Rosston's smile was genuine. "Choose whichever you like." She selected a volume of poetry and a novel she had heard of but never had the opportunity to read. As Mr. Thompson wrapped their purchases, Josie noticed Rosston adding one more item to their order: a small bottle of rosewater perfume. "A wedding gift," he said simply when he caught her looking. Their packages were loaded into Rosston's wagon, which was parked behind the store. The wagon bed already contained supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, and other staples that Rosston must have purchased earlier. "The ranch is about an hour's drive," he explained, helping Josie onto the wagon seat. "It's not a difficult journey, but we should get started before the afternoon heat." As they left Virginia City behind, the road winding through rolling grasslands, Josie tried to take in every detail of her new world. Wildflowers dotted the prairie in patches of purple and yellow, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the hillsides. The vast blue sky seemed to stretch forever, broken only by the occasional cloud and the silhouette of circling hawks. "Tell me about your ranch," Josie said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Rosston's face lit up at the question. "It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but the land is good. I started with just 20 acres and 50 head of cattle. Now I've got 300 acres and nearly 200 head. Pride colored his voice. "The house sits in a protected valley with Pine Creek running through it. Good water year-round, which is worth its weight in gold out here." "And you built the house yourself?" "I did. It's solid if not fancy. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a front room. I added a porch last summer." He glanced at her. "I know it's smaller than you're probably used to." Josie thought of the cramped boarding house room she'd occupied in Philadelphia after her parents' death. "I don't need fancy, Rosston, just a place that feels like home." Something in his expression softened. "I hope it will in time." They crested a hill, and Rosston pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing to the valley below. Josie gasped softly. The ranch spread before them, nestled in a verdant valley cradled by gentle hills. A creek wound through the property like a silver ribbon, bordered by cottonwood trees whose leaves shimmered in the afternoon light. Fields of grass stretched to the west, dotted with the dark shapes of cattle. At the center of it all stood a sturdy log cabin with a covered porch, smoke curling from its stone chimney. "It's beautiful," Josie whispered, and meant it. Rosston's smile was equal parts pride and relief. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed." As they descended into the valley, Josie noticed more details: a large barn and corral behind the house, a vegetable garden fenced to keep out wildlife, an orchard of young fruit trees just beginning to establish themselves. Signs of Rosston's hard work and planning were evident everywhere she looked. A dog's bark announced their arrival, and a large collie bounded from the porch to meet the wagon, tail wagging furiously. "That's Ranger," Rosston said. "Best cattle dog in the territory and a good guard besides." Ranger circled the wagon excitedly as Rosston brought it to a stop in front of the cabin. "Settle down, boy," he commanded, and the dog obediently sat, though his tail continued to thump against the ground. Rosston jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Josie. His hands were strong and steady on her waist as he lifted her to the ground. For a moment they stood close, the reality of their new situation hovering between them before Rosston stepped back. "Let me show you the house," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Then we can bring in our purchases." The cabin's interior was clean and orderly, if sparse. The front room contained a stone fireplace, a table with 4 chairs, a bookshelf with a dozen well-worn volumes, and a rocking chair beside a window that looked out over the valley. The kitchen was equipped with a cast iron stove, a pump for fresh water, and open shelving that held Rosston's simple collection of cooking implements. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted. "Mostly beans and biscuits and whatever game I can hunt." Josie ran her hand over the solid wooden table. "My mother taught me to cook. I can prepare decent meals with simple ingredients." Rosston showed her the 2 bedrooms, one larger with a handmade bed frame and patchwork quilt, the other smaller with a narrow cot that served as Rosston's workspace, covered in ledgers and ranch accounts. "This will be our room," he said, indicating the larger bedroom. "I'll move my papers to the front room. I usually work there in the evenings anyway." Josie stepped into the bedroom, noting the chest of drawers and small mirror on the wall. The quilt was faded but clean, the floors swept. Through the window, she could see the creek and the mountains beyond. "I hope it will be comfortable for you," Rosston said, watching her anxiously. "I know it's not what you're accustomed to." Josie turned to him with a genuine smile. "It's perfect, Rosston, truly. I can already see ways to make it even more of a home." Relief washed over his features. "Good, that's good." He cleared his throat. "I should unload the wagon. You can arrange your things however you like." As Rosston brought in their purchases from town, Josie explored her new home more thoroughly. The cabin was sturdily built, the logs chinked with mud and straw to keep out drafts. Though simple, everything was functional and well-maintained. She discovered small touches that spoke of Rosston's character: bookshelves built with careful craftsmanship, a carved wooden box that held his personal items, hooks by the door for hats and coats arranged by season. By the time their supplies were unloaded, the sun was beginning to set, casting golden light through the windows. Josie had unpacked her few possessions, placing her mother's cameo on the chest of drawers and her father's pocket watch beside it. "I should see to the evening chores," Rosston said, hovering in the doorway. "Make yourself at home. There's food in the pantry if you're hungry." "I'll prepare supper," Josie offered. "It will be ready when you're done." Rosston's smile was grateful. "That would be nice, thank you." Left alone in the cabin, Josie took a deep breath, allowing the reality of her new situation to settle over her. This morning, she had been Miss Josephine Abernathy, a mail-order bride with nothing but hope. Now she was Mrs. Rosston Reed, a rancher's wife with a home and purpose. The transition felt both sudden and strangely right, as if she had been meant to find her way here all along. In the kitchen, Josie rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She found beans soaking in a pot, evidence that Rosston had planned ahead for their meal. In the pantry were potatoes, onions, and a slab of salt pork. A quick trip to the garden yielded fresh carrots and herbs. Soon, a hearty stew was simmering on the stove, filling the cabin with appetizing aromas. She found plates and cutlery, setting the table with care. The new china they had purchased remained wrapped for now. This first meal would be served on Rosston's familiar dishes, a bridge between his old life and their new one together. Through the window, Josie could see Rosston moving between the barn and the corral, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset sky. Ranger followed at his heels, occasionally darting away to circle the cattle in the nearby pasture. There was confidence in Rosston's movements, the easy competence of a man who knew his work well. As darkness fell, Rosston returned to the cabin, stamping his boots on the porch before entering. The smell of stew greeted him, and he paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of Josie at the stove, the table set for two. "Something smells wonderful," he said, removing his hat and hanging it on a hook. "It's just a simple stew," Josie replied. "I hope you'll like it." Rosston washed his hands at the kitchen pump, then took his place at the table. Josie served the stew, along with slices of bread from Mrs. Holloway's basket. "This is the first time I've had company for supper in." "Well, a very long time," Rosston admitted as Josie sat across from him. "Usually it's just me and Ranger." "Where is he?" Josie asked, noticing the dog's absence. "He sleeps in the barn, keeps the coyotes away from the chickens." Rosston tasted the stew and his eyes widened in appreciation. "This is delicious. Thank you. It's one of my mother's recipes." Josie watched as he took another spoonful. "I can teach you if you like, so you don't have to live on beans when I'm not able to cook." Rosston chuckled. "I'd appreciate that, though I hope you'll be doing most of the cooking from now on." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the crackle of the fire Rosston had lit in the fireplace to ward off the evening chill. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Rosston said finally. "What was your life like there?" Josie considered how to answer. "I was born and raised there. My father was a clerk in a shipping office, my mother a seamstress. We lived modestly but comfortably until the war." She stirred her stew thoughtfully. "After father returned, things were harder. His health was never the same and work became scarce. When they both passed last winter, I had to leave our home." "I'm sorry," Rosston said softly. "Losing parents is hard, no matter the circumstances." "What about your family?" Josie asked, eager to shift the focus from her losses. "My father was a farmer in Ohio. Good man, worked himself to the bone to provide for us. My mother died when I was 12, influenza. Father followed 6 years later." Rosston's expression grew distant. "After the war, I couldn't face going back to the farm alone. Sold it and headed west with the money." "Do you have siblings?" "A brother, Richard. He settled in California after the war. We write occasionally." Rosston refilled his bowl from the pot on the stove. "This really is excellent stew, Josie." The use of her name, casual and natural, warmed her more than the praise for her cooking. "Thank you. I'm glad you enjoy it." After dinner, Rosston insisted on helping with the dishes. They worked side by side at the kitchen pump, Josie washing and Rosston drying. The domesticity of the task eased some of the awkwardness between them, establishing a rhythm of partnership. Once the kitchen was tidy, Rosston stoked the fire in the fireplace. "I usually review the ledgers in the evening," he said, gesturing to his account books. "But perhaps tonight we could just sit. Get to know each other better." Josie nodded, settling into the rocking chair while Rosston took a seat on a wooden stool near the fire. For a moment, neither spoke, the crackling flames filling the silence. "I want you to know," Rosston began hesitantly, "that I understand this marriage is unusual. We're strangers in many ways despite our letters. I don't expect." He trailed off, searching for words. You don't expect me to be a wife in all senses immediately, Josie finished for him, her cheeks warming. Yes. Rosston looked relieved that she understood. We have time to grow comfortable with each other. The bedroom is yours for now. I can sleep out here until you're ready. Josie was touched by his consideration. Thank you, but I don't want to displace you from your bed. The cabin isn't so large that we can't share the room even if we don't yet. Share more. Rosston nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and something harder to define. As you wish. I'll make up a pallet on the floor for tonight. They talked for another hour, sharing stories from their pasts, discovering connections and differences. Rosston spoke of his early days in Montana, the harsh winter that nearly broke him, the friendships he'd formed with neighboring ranchers who helped him survive. Josie told him about growing up in Philadelphia, her education at the local school, her love of books and music. As the fire died down to embers, Rosston stood. It's getting late and tomorrow will come early. Ranch work starts at dawn. Josie rose as well, suddenly nervous about the night ahead despite Rosston's assurances. Yes, of course. They prepared for bed with careful courtesy, taking turns using the small washroom off the kitchen. Josie changed into her nightgown behind the closed bedroom door, her heart pounding as she heard Rosston moving about the cabin, banking the fire and checking the doors. When he knocked softly on the bedroom door, Josie had already climbed into bed, the quilt pulled up to her chin. Come in, she called. Rosston entered, carrying blankets for his makeshift bed on the floor. He had removed his boots and outer shirt, wearing only his trousers and an undershirt that revealed arms muscled from ranch work. He avoided looking directly at Josie as he arranged his bedding. Is there anything you need before we sleep? He asked, still not meeting her eyes. No, thank you. I'm quite comfortable. Good. That's good. Rosston extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness broken only by moonlight filtering through the curtainless window. Good night, Josie. Good night, Rosston. Josie lay in the darkness, listening to Rosston's breathing as it gradually deepened and steadied. Outside, an owl hooted, and the wind whispered through the cottonwoods by the creek. Strange sounds to her city-trained ears, yet somehow soothing in their wildness. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was one of cautious hope. She had come to Montana with nothing but that hope, and found a man who seemed to offer the same in return, a chance to build something genuine from their practical arrangement. It wasn't love, not yet. But perhaps, in time, it could become something just as valuable. Josie woke to the sound of movement in the cabin. Gray dawn light filtered through the window, and Rosston's pallet on the floor was empty, the blankets neatly folded. For a moment, she lay still, remembering where she was, a ranch in Montana territory, the home of the man she had married just yesterday. The smell of coffee drew her from the bed. She dressed quickly in one of her work dresses, pinned her hair into a simple knot, and made her way to the kitchen. Rosston stood at the stove, poking at something in a cast-iron skillet. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, a look of surprise crossing his face. Good morning, he said. I didn't expect you up so early. I want to learn the rhythms of ranch life, Josie replied. Starting with when the day begins. Rosston smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Well, you're right on time then. I'm attempting breakfast before the morning chores. He gestured to the skillet. Though I'm afraid I'm not much of a cook. Josie peered into the pan where eggs were scrambling unevenly amid chunks of potato. May I? She asked, reaching for the wooden spoon in his hand. Please, Rosston said with evident relief, yielding his place at the stove. With practiced movements, Josie rescued the breakfast, adding a pinch of salt and stirring until the eggs were cooked through, but not rubbery. She found plates in the cupboard and served the food while Rosston poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "This is better than anything I've managed in years," Rosston said after his first bite. "I think I got the better end of our bargain, Mrs. Reed." The use of her married name sent a small thrill through Josie. "I think we both have yet to discover all the benefits," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Rosston's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a spark of connection that transcended their practical arrangement. Then he glanced at the window, noting the strengthening light. "I need to start the morning chores. Would you like to come along? I can show you around the property." "I'd like that very much." After breakfast, Josie put on one of her new pairs of boots and the work gloves Rosston had insisted she would need. The morning air was crisp and cool when they stepped outside, though the cloudless sky promised heat later in the day. Ranger bounded up to greet them, circling excitedly as Rosston led the way to the barn. "First order of business is always checking the livestock," Rosston explained. "Then feeding, mucking out stalls, and whatever repairs need doing." The barn was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with stalls for 6 horses, a separate area for tack and tools, and a hayloft overhead. 2 horses nickered in greeting as they entered, a sturdy chestnut gelding and a smaller dappled mare. "That's Buck," Rosston said, nodding toward the gelding. "Best cow horse I've ever had, and the mare is Daisy. She's gentler, good for riding into town or for someone who's not used to horses." He glanced at Josie. "Do you ride?" "Not since I was a girl," Josie admitted, "and never Western style. Daisy will take good care of you when you're ready to learn again." Rosston began measuring out grain for the horses. "You can help by filling their water troughs if you like." Josie took the bucket he indicated and went to the pump outside the barn. As she worked alongside Rosston, he explained the daily operations of the ranch, how the cattle were managed, the rotation of pastures, the importance of water sources and fencing. "In the summer, most of the herd grazes in the north pasture," he said as they walked along a split-rail fence. "Come fall, we'll move them to the south slopes where they're more protected from the early snows." Josie asked, "do you have help with the ranch work?" "I hire hands during calving season and for the autumn roundup. The rest of the year, it's mostly just me and Ranger. My neighbor Thomas helps when he can, and I do the same for him." Rosston gazed out over the pasture where his cattle grazed. "It's a good life, but it can be lonely." The simple admission touched Josie. She understood loneliness all too well. "Not anymore," she said quietly. Rosston looked down at her, his expression softening. "No, not anymore." They continued their tour, Rosston pointing out the boundaries of his property, the places where coyotes sometimes breached the fencing, the spring-fed pond where cattle watered during the dry months. Josie listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her intelligence and practical nature. By the time they returned to the cabin for the midday meal, Rosston was looking at her with newfound respect. "You're a quick study," he said as they washed up at the kitchen pump. "Most city folks take longer to grasp the workings of a ranch." "I've always been observant," Josie replied. "And I want to be useful, not just decorative." Rosston's laugh was unexpected and warm. "I don't think I've ever owned anything decorative in my life, Josie. Everything here serves a purpose." "Including a wife?" she asked, then bit her lip, unsure if the question was too forward. "Especially a wife," Rosston answered seriously. "But not in the way you might think. Having someone to share this life with, the work, yes, but also the beauty of it, the satisfaction of building something lasting that's a purpose beyond mere practicality." His words stirred something in Josie's heart. She had come to Montana expecting a business arrangement, an exchange of her domestic skills for security and protection. She hadn't expected her husband to speak of sharing beauty and building a legacy together. After a simple lunch of bread and cold meat, Rosston needed to ride out to check the fencing on the far side of the property. "I'll be back before supper," he promised. "Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," Josie assured him. "I have plenty to keep me occupied." Once Rosston had ridden away, Ranger trotting at Buck's heels, Josie turned her attention to the cabin. Though clean, it showed the signs of a bachelor's residence, functional but sparse, lacking the touches that transformed a house into a home. The new curtain fabric they'd purchased was still wrapped in brown paper on the table. With methodical efficiency, Josie measured the windows, then set to work with needle and thread. By late afternoon, she had hung curtains in the front room and bedroom, swept every corner of the cabin, arranged her few books alongside Rosston's on the shelf, and begun preparing a more substantial supper than the previous night's stew. The vegetables from the garden were plentiful, and she found a cured ham in the cold storage behind the cabin. Biscuits were rising by the stove when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Through the new curtains, she watched Rosston dismount and lead Buck to the barn. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to physical work, his broad shoulders straight despite what must have been a tiring day. Josie smoothed her hair and straightened her apron, feeling a flutter of anticipation at his return. When Rosston entered the cabin, he stopped just inside the door, his eyes widening as he took in the changes. "Well," he said softly, "this is a homecoming." "Do you like the curtains?" Josie asked, suddenly uncertain. "I hope I haven't overstepped. Like them." "Josie, the place has never looked so civilized." Rosston removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "It's as if you've worked magic." "Hardly magic, just a woman's touch." Josie gestured toward the kitchen. "Supper will be ready soon. There's hot water for washing up." As they ate, Rosston told her about his day, the broken fence he'd repaired, the new calf born in the far pasture, the signs of mountain lion tracks he'd found near the eastern boundary. Josie listened, asking questions that showed her growing understanding of ranch concerns. "You're worried about the mountain lion," she observed when he mentioned the tracks a second time. Rosston nodded, impressed by her perception. "They usually stay higher up, but this drought has driven game down to the valley. If it starts taking calves, I'll have to hunt it." "Is that dangerous?" "It can be, but I won't take unnecessary risks." His eyes met hers across the table. "I have more reason than ever to come home safely." The simple statement warmed Josie more than any flowery declaration could have. Rosston wasn't a man of many words, but those he spoke carried weight. After supper, they again shared the task of cleaning up, working together with increasing comfort. When the kitchen was tidy, Rosston hesitated, glancing at his account books. "You needn't change your routine for me," Josie said, noting his uncertainty. "If you usually work on the ledgers in the evening, please do so. Are you sure? I don't want to neglect you." "We'll have many evenings together, Rosston. Establishing patterns that work for both of us is important." She picked up one of her new books. "I'll be quite content reading while you work." Gratitude flickered across his face. "Thank you. I won't be long." They settled into a companionable silence, Rosston at the table with his ledgers, Josie in the rocking chair with her novel. The only sounds were the scratch of Rosston's pencil, the turning of pages, and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Outside, an evening breeze stirred the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Josie found her attention wandering from her book to the man across the room. Rosston's brow was furrowed in concentration as he worked, his strong hands careful with the fragile pages of his accounts. There was something deeply appealing about his focus, the seriousness with which he approached his responsibilities. When he looked up and caught her watching him, Josie didn't look away. You keep very organized records, she observed. A lesson from my father. He always said a farmer who doesn't know his numbers is a farmer who'll lose his land. Rosston closed the ledger. Would you like to learn the business side of ranching? You seem to have a good head for detail. I would, yes. Josie set aside her book. My father taught me basic bookkeeping when I was young. He believed women should understand finances even if society didn't expect it of them. A progressive man. He was, in his way. Josie smiled at the memory, though he was scandalized when I suggested women should have the vote. Rosston's eyebrows rose. And do you believe women should vote, Mrs. Reed? I do, Mr. Reed, Josie replied, lifting her chin slightly. Does that concern you? A slow smile spread across Rosston's face. On the contrary. A woman who can manage a household, assist with ranch work, and hold political opinions is exactly the kind of partner I hoped for, but didn't dare expect. Josie felt herself blushing under his approving gaze. Well, you may regret encouraging me when I start sharing all my opinions. I doubt that very much. Rosston rose and added another log to the fire. I've never understood men who want meek, silent wives. What's the point of sharing your life with someone if you don't want to hear what they think? The evening deepened, and eventually they prepared for bed with the same careful courtesy as the night before. This time, however, as Rosston arranged his pallet on the floor, Josie found herself wanting to protest the arrangement. Rosston, she said hesitantly as he blew out the lamp, I've been thinking. The bed is certainly large enough for both of us, and the floor must be uncomfortable. In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression, but she heard his sharp intake of breath. Josie, I promised I wouldn't rush you. Sharing a bed for sleep is hardly rushing, she pointed out, her heart pounding. We're married, after all. Are you certain? I am. She patted the empty side of the bed. Please, I'd rest easier knowing you're comfortable. After a moment's hesitation, Rosston gathered his blanket and moved to the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight as he carefully arranged himself as far to the edge as possible, a respectful distance between them. Good night, Rosston, Josie whispered. Good night, Josie, he replied, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. They lay side by side, not touching but acutely aware of each other's presence. Eventually, Rosston's breathing deepened into sleep, but Josie remained awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana night and the more unfamiliar sound of her husband sleeping beside her. There was comfort in his presence, she realized. Despite the newness of their situation, despite the practical nature of their marriage, she felt safer with Rosston Reed than she had in a very long time. With that thought, she finally drifted into sleep. The days that followed fell into a rhythm as natural as the rising and setting of the sun. Rosston taught Josie the workings of the ranch, and she quickly proved herself both capable and willing to learn. She took over the management of the house and garden, bringing order and comfort to spaces that had known only bachelor efficiency. In the evenings, they shared the day's events over supper, then worked or read by the fire until bedtime when they lay side by side, the space between them gradually diminishing as their comfort with each other grew. A week after the wedding, Rosston announced they would need to go into Virginia City for supplies. I usually make the trip every other week, he explained over breakfast. We need flour and sugar, and Thompson will have the new seed I ordered for the winter wheat. Josie had been hoping for just such an opportunity. Her time of the month was approaching, and there were female necessities she hadn't been able to request during the hasty shopping expedition on their wedding day. I'd like to visit the general store as well, she said, and perhaps Mrs. Holloway if we have time, of course. We can make a day of it. The ride to town was pleasant, the September day warm but not uncomfortably so. Rosston drove the wagon while Josie sat beside him, taking in the changing landscape as they left the valley and traveled across the rolling plains. He pointed out landmarks and neighboring ranches, sharing stories of his early days in the territory. "That hill there," he said, gesturing to a distinct rise to the east, "is where I first saw my land. I'd been traveling for weeks, nearly out of money, starting to think I'd made a terrible mistake coming west. Then I climbed that hill at sunrise and saw the valley spread out below, with the creek running through it and the mountains rising beyond." His voice softened with the memory. "It felt like Providence had led me there." "It's a beautiful spot," Josie agreed. "I can see why you fell in love with it." Rosston glanced at her, something unspoken in his eyes. "Yes, some things you just know are meant to be yours even at first sight." Virginia City was busy when they arrived, the streets bustling with ranchers, miners, and townsfolk going about their business. Josie realized she'd hardly noticed the town during her brief stay before the wedding, too overwhelmed by her new circumstances to take in the details. Now she observed the mix of sturdy buildings and hastily constructed ones, evidence of the town's growth from mining camp to established settlement. Their first stop was the general store, where Mr. Thompson greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Reed, you're looking well. Ranch life must agree with you." "It does, thank you," Josie replied, pleased by the genuine welcome. While Rosston discussed his seed order with Mr. Thompson, Josie browsed the store's offerings. When Mrs. Thompson appeared from the back room, Josie took the opportunity to quietly request the personal items she needed. The older woman understood immediately, discreetly packaging them while continuing their conversation about preserving vegetables for winter. "And how are you finding married life, my dear?" Mrs. Thompson asked in a low voice, eyeing Rosston across the store. "It's a good beginning," Josie answered honestly. "Rosston is kind and patient. We're still learning about each other." Mrs. Thompson patted her hand. "The best marriages start that way, building day by day, far better than those whirlwind romances that burn hot and then fizzle." After completing their purchases, they visited the bank, where Rosston introduced Josie to the manager and added her name to his account. "In case anything happens to me," he explained as they left, "you should have access to whatever funds we have." The practical consideration touched Josie deeply. "Thank you. I hope it's a precaution we never need, but I appreciate your forethought." They stopped for lunch at a small cafe that had opened since Josie's arrival. The food was simple but well prepared, and Josie enjoyed the novelty of a meal she hadn't cooked herself. Rosston seemed to take pleasure in watching her experience these small luxuries, his normally serious expression softening whenever she showed delight in something new. As they were finishing their meal, the door to the cafe opened, admitting a well-dressed man with a calculating gaze. He spotted Rosston immediately and approached their table. "Reed," he said, his tone just shy of friendly. "Didn't expect to see you in town today." Rosston's posture stiffened slightly. "Hollister, just picking up supplies," he turned to Josie. "This is Edwin Hollister. He owns the big spread east of town. Edwin, my wife, Josephine Reed." Hollister's eyebrows rose as he took in Josie with newfound interest. "Wife? Well, now that's news." "When did this happen?" "Just over a week ago," Rosston replied. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Reed." Hollister tipped his hat, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You must be the mail-order bride folks have been talking about. Brave woman, coming all this way to marry a man you'd never met." Josie lifted her chin slightly. "Mr. Reed and I corresponded for some time before I made my decision, and I've found Montana to be exactly as promised, beautiful and full of opportunity." "Is that so?" Hollister's gaze flickered between them. "Well, Reed's place is modest, but I suppose it's a start. If you ever find yourself wanting more refined company, my wife hosts gatherings for the ladies of the territory. Proper affairs, with china teacups and everything. Thank you for the invitation, Josie replied coolly, but I'm quite content with my current company. Hollister's smile tightened. Of course. Well, I won't interrupt your meal further. Reed, remember what I said about that water rights issue. My offer still stands. After he departed, Josie raised an eyebrow at Rosston. What water rights issue? Rosston sighed, running a hand through his hair. Hollister's been trying to buy the northern section of my property for years. It includes a natural spring that feeds into his land during the wet season. He claims he needs guaranteed access year-round for his cattle. And you don't want to sell. It's good grazing land, and that spring is valuable, especially in dry years like this one. Rosston's jaw tightened. Besides, Hollister has enough water. He just wants to control every drop in the county. Josie considered this new information. He didn't seem pleased to learn you had married. Probably thought I'd eventually give up and sell out. A bachelor alone might decide it's not worth the fight. Rosston reached across the table, covering her hand with his. But a man with a family has reason to hold onto what's his. The word family hung between them, full of possibility. They hadn't yet discussed children, though Josie knew it must be part of Rosston's expectations for their marriage. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Bringing new life into this wild country would be a challenge. But the idea of children with Rosston's steadfastness and, perhaps, his kind eyes was not unwelcome. Their final stop in town was Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, where they were welcomed with enthusiastic hugs and immediately ushered into the parlor for tea and cake. "Look at you," Mrs. Holloway exclaimed, beaming at Josie. "A week of country air has done wonders. You've got roses in your cheeks now." "Ranch life agrees with her," Rosston said, his voice warm with pride. "She's taken to it like she was born to it." "Of course she has," Mrs. Holloway replied. "I knew you two would suit the moment I saw you together. Now tell me everything about the ranch. Are you comfortable? Is there anything you need?" As Josie described her new home and the improvements she'd already made, Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. Rosston sat quietly, sipping his tea and watching Josie with an expression that made her cheeks warm. There was admiration in his gaze, and something deeper that she wasn't yet ready to name. The sun was beginning its descent when they finally took their leave, promising to return for a proper visit soon. As they drove out of town, Josie found herself reflecting on the day. It had felt natural to be at Rosston's side, to be introduced as Mrs. Reed, to share the small details of their life together. The practical arrangement was evolving into something more genuine with each passing day. "You were wonderful with Hollister," Rosston said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Most newcomers are intimidated by him. He reminded me of certain men in Philadelphia who mistake wealth for character," Josie replied. "My father taught me to judge people by their actions, not their possessions. A wise man, your father." Rosston's hands were steady on the reins. "I wish I could have met him. He would have liked you," Josie said with certainty. "He valued honesty and hard work above all else." They drove on as the sky turned golden, then pink, then deepened to purple. The first stars were appearing when they crested the hill overlooking the ranch. Below, the cabin windows glowed with the light Rosston had left burning that morning, a beacon welcoming them home. "It's a good sight, isn't it?" Rosston said softly. "Coming home at day's end." "Yes," Josie agreed, feeling a swell of emotion in her chest. "It is." That night, as they prepared for bed, something had shifted between them. The careful distance they had maintained seemed suddenly unnecessary. a formality at odds with the growing connection they both felt. When Rosston blew out the lamp and settled beside her, Josie found herself turning toward him rather than away. "Rosston," she whispered in the darkness, "I want you to know that I'm glad I came to Montana. I'm glad I answered your advertisement." She felt rather than saw him turn to face her. "Are you truly, even with all you've left behind?" "Yes." Josie reached out, finding his hand in the darkness. "What I left behind was loneliness and uncertainty. What I've found here is purpose and possibility." Rosston's fingers closed around hers. "Josie, I want to be a good husband to you, not just in name or in providing a home, but in all ways. I just don't want to rush you." "I know." She moved closer until she could feel the warmth of him beside her. "And I appreciate your consideration, but perhaps we've been too cautious with each other." In the darkness, Rosston's free hand came up to touch her cheek, his fingers gentle against her skin. "Perhaps we have." The kiss that followed was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. When Josie responded, her hand moving to Rosston's shoulder, the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more honest. "Josie," Rosston murmured against her lips, "are you certain?" "I'm certain," she whispered back, and pulled him closer. In the weeks that followed, Josie and Rosston's marriage transformed from a practical arrangement into a true partnership. The physical intimacy they now shared was matched by a deepening emotional connection, as they learned each other's histories, hopes, and dreams in conversations that stretched long into the night. Josie discovered that beneath Rosston's quiet exterior lay a thoughtful mind and a tender heart. Rosston found in Josie not just the helpmate he had hoped for, but a woman of strength, intelligence, and unexpected humor. October brought the first frost, painting the valley with silver in the early mornings. Rosston hired 3 hands to help with the autumn roundup, and Josie found herself cooking for a full table, her days busy with preparing meals substantial enough to fuel men working from dawn till dusk. The hands Joe, a weathered cowboy with decades of experience, Miguel, a skilled horseman from New Mexico territory, and young Teddy, barely 20 but eager to learn, treated Josie with a mixture of respect and shy appreciation for her cooking. "Mrs. Reed, these are the best biscuits in the territory," Joe declared one evening, reaching for his 3rd helping. "Boss is a lucky man." Rosston, seated at the head of the table, smiled at Josie. "Don't I know it?" The roundup was successful, with more calves than expected, and the herd in good health despite the dry summer. When it came time to drive the cattle to market in Helena, Rosston hesitated, reluctant to leave Josie alone for the week the journey would require. "I'll be fine," Josie assured him as they stood on the porch, watching the hands prepare the herd for the drive. "Mrs. Thompson showed me how to use your rifle, and Ranger will be here." "I don't like the idea of you alone out here," Rosston said, his brow furrowed. "Hollister's been riding his boundaries close to our property lately. You think he'd cause trouble? Not directly. But he's not above trying to intimidate when he thinks no one's watching." Rosston sighed. "I could ask Miguel to stay behind and lose an experienced hand for the drive." "No, that doesn't make sense." Josie squared her shoulders. "I can manage for a week, Rosston. This is part of being a rancher's wife." The pride in his eyes as he looked at her was worth any anxiety she might feel about his absence. "You're remarkable, Josie Reed. Do you know that?" "I'm practical," she corrected him, though she flushed with pleasure at his praise. "Now go on. The sooner you leave, the sooner you'll return." The goodbye that followed was private and passionate, a promise of return that left Josie breathless. She stood on the porch until the last rider disappeared over the hill, then turned back to the cabin, determined to keep busy during Rosston's absence. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. Josie tended to the chickens and the vegetable garden, worked on the quilt she was making for winter, and prepared the house for Rosston's return. On the third day, as she was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin, Ranger began to bark not his usual greeting, but a sharp, warning sound that raised the hair on the back of Josie's neck. Setting down her basket, she moved to the corner of the cabin, peering around to see what had alarmed the dog. 3 riders were approaching from the east, following the creek that marked the property line. Even at a distance, she recognized Edwin Hollister on the lead horse, his posture unmistakable. Josie's first instinct was to retreat into the cabin, but she immediately rejected the impulse. This was her home, and she would not be intimidated on her own land. Instead, she walked calmly to the porch, Ranger at her heels, and waited for the riders to approach. "Mrs. Reed," Hollister called as they drew near. "I hope we haven't startled you. We were riding the boundaries and thought we'd pay a neighborly visit." "Mr. Hollister," Josie acknowledged with a nod. "This is a surprise." Hollister dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. "I heard Reed took the herd to Helena. Thought you might appreciate some company out here all alone." His gaze moved over the property, assessing. "It's a lot for one woman to manage." "I manage quite well, thank you." Josie kept her voice even. "My husband will be returning in a few days." "Of course." Hollister approached the porch, stopping at the bottom step. "I actually wanted to discuss a business matter with you." "Perhaps you could convey it to your husband when he returns." "I'd be happy to pass along a message. It's about the north pasture and the spring." Hollister gestured toward the hills. "I'm prepared to offer a very generous sum more than the land is worth, frankly. It would be a substantial start for a young couple, perhaps enough to build a bigger house." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "A woman like you deserves more than a 2-room cabin, Mrs. Reed." Josie lifted her chin. "Mr. Reed and I are quite content with our home, Mr. Hollister. And I believe my husband has already declined your offers for that land." "He has, but I thought perhaps a sensible woman might help him see reason." Hollister's tone hardened slightly. "This is no place to raise a family, Mrs. Reed. It's too isolated, too vulnerable. Why, anything could happen out here and no one would know for days." The implication wasn't lost on Josie, but she refused to show fear. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Hollister?" "Threatening? My dear Mrs. Reed, I'm offering you an opportunity." Hollister spread his hands. "But opportunities don't last forever. Sometimes decisions need to be made quickly, before circumstances change." Ranger growled low in his throat, sensing Josie's tension. The 2 men with Hollister shifted in their saddles, one of them resting his hand near his holster. "I appreciate your concern for my welfare," Josie said coolly, "but any decisions regarding our property will be made by Mr. Reed and myself together, after careful consideration. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to attend to." Hollister's smile faded. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Reed. This valley isn't big enough for stubborn holdouts. Progress is coming, whether Reed accepts it or not. Then we'll face that progress together on our own terms." Josie remained on the porch, her back straight. "Good day, gentlemen." For a moment, Hollister's face darkened with anger. Then he shrugged, turning back to his horse. "Have it your way. Give Reed my regards when he returns if the cattle drive goes smoothly. Mountain passes can be dangerous this time of year." The ominous parting shot hung in the air as the 3 men mounted and rode away. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Josie allow herself to tremble, sinking onto the porch step with Ranger pressed against her side, his warm body a comfort. "Good boy," she murmured, stroking his fur. "We stood our ground, didn't we?" That night, Josie double-checked every lock and kept the rifle near the bed. Sleep came fitfully, broken by every creak of the cabin and rustle of wind in the trees. By morning, however, her fear had been replaced by determination. Hollister's veiled threats had been designed to frighten her, to make her pressure Rosston into selling. Instead, they had only strengthened her resolve to protect what was theirs. The remaining days of Rosston's absence passed without incident, though Josie remained vigilant. She found herself talking aloud to Ranger as she worked, telling him about Philadelphia, about her parents, about her growing feelings for Rosston. The dog would cock his head as if listening intently, then lick her hand in what seemed like understanding. "He's a good man, Ranger," she said as they sat on the porch watching the sunset on the 6th day. "I didn't expect to feel this way so soon. I thought it would be a partnership of convenience, not." She trailed off, unable to name the emotion that filled her chest whenever she thought of her husband. Ranger's ears perked up suddenly, and he rose, tail wagging. A moment later, Josie heard it too, the distant sound of horses approaching. She stood, shading her eyes against the setting sun, her heart pounding in anticipation. And there they were, cresting the hill, Rosston in the lead on Buck, followed by the three hands and the pack horses. Even at a distance, she could see the exhaustion in their postures, the dust covering their clothes. But they were home, safe, and the relief that flooded through her was so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Josie ran to meet them, propriety forgotten in her joy. Rosston dismounted quickly, catching her in his arms as she reached him. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair while the hands exchanged knowing grins. "You're home," Josie whispered against his chest. "I missed you so much." "I rode ahead of the others," Rosston admitted. "Couldn't bear another night away from you." They broke apart, conscious of their audience but unable to stop smiling at each other. The hands led the horses to the barn while Rosston and Josie walked hand in hand to the cabin. "How was the drive?" Josie asked. "Did you get a good price for the cattle?" "Better than expected. We'll be comfortable through winter and have enough left over for improvements in the spring." Rosston squeezed her hand. "And how were things here? Any trouble?" Josie hesitated, then decided honesty was essential. Hollister and two of his men paid a visit. He made another offer for the north pasture. Rosston stopped walking, his expression darkening. "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly, but the implication was clear." Josie met his gaze steadily. "I told him we weren't interested in selling and that any decisions about our land would be made together." "Our land," Rosston repeated, his eyes softening. "I like the sound of that, as do I." Josie touched his cheek, feeling the trail dust and stubble beneath her fingers. "This is our home, Rosston. I won't let anyone intimidate us out of it." Rosston covered her hand with his own. "Do you know what I thought about most during the drive? Not the cattle or the price they'd fetch, but coming back to you, seeing your face, hearing your voice." His eyes held hers intently. "I knew when I sent that advertisement that I needed a wife. What I didn't know was how much I would come to need you, specifically. You, Josie Reed, with your courage and your kindness and your determination." The words Josie had been holding back for weeks rose to her lips. "I love you, Rosston. I didn't expect to, not so soon, but I do." Joy transformed his travel-worn face. "And I love you, Josie. I think I started falling the moment you stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but your carpet bag and hope in your eyes." The kiss that followed was tender at first, then deepened with the urgency of their week apart. When they finally broke away, both breathless, the sun had set, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "The hands will be hungry," Josie said reluctantly. "I should start supper." Rosston nodded, though his eyes still held the promise of later privacy. "And I should see to the horses. But Josie," he caught her hand as she turned toward the cabin, "thank you for defending our home, for being the kind of partner I always hoped for but never truly believed I'd find." That night, after the hands had been fed and had retired to the bunkhouse, after the day's stories had been shared and plans for winter discussed, Rosston and Josie lay together in their bed, the space between them now non-existent. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the valley in white, while inside, the warmth of their love created a sanctuary against the approaching winter. "I have something to tell you," Josie whispered in the darkness, her head resting on Rosston's chest. I'm quite sure that we're going to have a baby." Rosston's arms tightened around her. "Josie, are you certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation? I'm nearly 2 weeks late and I've been feeling different, more tired, and certain smells bother me." Rosston's hand moved to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" Josie asked, suddenly anxious. "I know it's sooner than we might have planned. Pleased." Rosston raised himself on one elbow to look down at her, his face visible in the moonlight reflecting off the new snow. "Josie, I'm overjoyed. A child of our own." He kissed her reverently. "Thank you for this gift." As snow continued to fall outside their window, Josie and Rosston held each other close, their hearts full of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together, a mail-order bride with nothing but hope. A rancher who discovered that hope was all he needed too, and the love that had grown between them like a seed planted in fertile ground, now blossoming into a family. Spring came late to Montana in 1876, the winter snows lingering well into April. When the thaw finally arrived, it brought with it a surge of new life, calves in the pastures, wildflowers in the meadows, and growth everywhere Josie looked. Her own body had changed as well, her slender frame now softly rounded with 6 months of pregnancy. The months of winter had transformed the cabin too. Confined indoors by snow and cold, Josie and Rosston had worked together to expand their home. A third room had been added, a nursery adjacent to their bedroom, and the front room enlarged to accommodate the growing collection of books and household items that made the cabin truly theirs. The improvements weren't just practical. They were a testament to the permanence of their union, a statement that Reed Ranch would endure for generations to come. Hollister had not returned since his confrontation with Josie in the fall, though rumors reached them that he was buying up smaller spreads throughout the county. Rosston remained vigilant but focused on their own prosperity rather than their neighbors' ambitions. On a warm May morning, Josie stood on the porch, watching Rosston mend the corral fence. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the baby's movements beneath her palm. At 4 months, they had ridden into Virginia City to confirm her pregnancy with the doctor, who had declared both mother and child to be in excellent health. Now, with less than 3 months until their baby's arrival, preparations were in full swing. "Rosston," Josie called, "I'm going to check the garden. The peas should be ready to pick." He looked up from his work, smiling at the sight of her. "Don't overdo it. I'll come help when I finish this section." "I'm pregnant, not helpless," she reminded him, though his concern warmed her heart. The vegetable garden had expanded under Josie's care, now providing most of their produce needs. As she moved between the neat rows, basket in hand, she reflected on how much her life had changed in the past year. From a destitute seamstress in Philadelphia to a rancher's wife in Montana, expecting their first child, it was a transformation she could never have imagined. As she picked the plump pea pods, Josie heard the sound of approaching horses. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 3 riders coming up the road from town. One of them, she realized with a jolt of recognition, was Pastor Evans. Setting down her basket, Josie made her way back to the yard, where Rosston had also noticed the visitors and was walking to meet them. She joined him, her hand slipping naturally into his. "Pastor Evans," Rosston greeted the older man, "this is an unexpected pleasure." "What brings you out to Reed Ranch?" The pastor dismounted, his expression grave. "I'm afraid I come with troubling news, Rosston. There's been a development in town that concerns you directly." The two men accompanying Pastor Evans, Mr. Thompson, from the general store, and another man Josie recognized as a member of the town council also dismounted, their faces serious. "What's happened?" Rosston asked, his hand tightening on Josie's. "Hollister has filed a claim with the territorial court," Mr. Thompson explained. "He's challenging your ownership of the north section, including the spring. Claims he has documentation showing the land was improperly surveyed and should have been part of his original grant." Rosston's face hardened. "That's absurd. I have clear title to that land. It was properly registered when I purchased it." "We know," the councilman said. "But Hollister has hired lawyers from Helena, and he's managed to get a temporary injunction preventing you from using the spring while the case is reviewed." "That spring feeds our creek," Josie protested. "It's the main water source for our cattle during the dry season." Pastor Evans nodded. "That's precisely why we rode out to warn you. The case won't be heard until July, but Hollister's men are already setting up to enforce the injunction. They're putting up fencing along the disputed boundary." Rosston released Josie's hand, his jaw tight with anger. "He's been after that land for years. This is just his latest attempt to force us out." He turned to Josie. "I need to ride up and see what they're doing." "I'll come with you," she said immediately. "No," Rosston's voice was firm. "Not in your condition. I need you to stay here where it's safe." He looked at Pastor Evans. "Would you gentlemen mind staying with my wife while I assess the situation?" "Of course," Pastor Evans agreed. "Take whatever time you need." Rosston kissed Josie briefly, his hand touching her belly in a protective gesture. "I'll be back soon, don't worry." As Rosston rode toward the northern boundary, Josie invited the visitors into the cabin. Mrs. Holloway had taught her to always have refreshments ready for unexpected guests, and she was grateful now for the fresh bread and preserves she could offer. "You've made this place a real home," Mr. Thompson observed, looking around the improved cabin. "Reed's a lucky man." "We're both fortunate," Josie replied, pouring coffee for the men. "This land has been good to us." Pastor Evans accepted his cup with thanks. "I've known Rosston since he first came to Virginia City. Never seen him as content as he's been since you arrived, Mrs. Reed. That's why we felt we had to warn him personally about Hollister's machinations." "You think there's any validity to his claim?" Josie asked, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. The men exchanged glances. "The documentation looks suspicious to me," the councilman said. "Conveniently discovered after all these years, but Hollister has influence with the territorial judge and money talks. What can we do?" Josie asked, her mind racing with the implications. Without access to the spring, their cattle would suffer in the summer heat. The creek that ran by the cabin would diminish to a trickle, potentially leaving them without adequate water for the household and garden. "Fight it legally, of course," Pastor Evans said. "Rosston has his original deed and survey, but these cases can drag on, and in the meantime, Hollister gets what he wants: control of the water," Josie finished, understanding the strategy. "He's counting on us not being able to sustain a long legal battle. Or he's hoping to pressure you into selling out entirely," Mr. Thompson added. "With a baby on the way, the idea of a prolonged fight might seem less appealing." Josie's determination hardened. "He doesn't understand what this ranch means to us if he thinks that. This is our home, our future, our child's birthright. We won't be intimidated out of it." The sound of a horse approaching at speed interrupted their conversation. Josie moved to the window, expecting to see Rosston returning. Instead, it was Joe, one of the hands they'd rehired for the spring calving, riding hard toward the cabin. Josie hurried to the door, the three men following. "Joe, what's happened?" The cowboy reined in his horse sharply. "Mrs. Reed, you need to come quick. There's trouble at the north boundary. Hollister's men are armed and the boss is outnumbered." Fear clutched at Josie's heart. "Is Rosston hurt?" "Not when I left, but things were getting heated. He sent me to fetch help." Joe's eyes moved to the three visitors. "Good, you gentlemen are armed. We may need it." Pastor Evans stepped forward. "I'll go. Mr. Thompson, perhaps you should stay here with Mrs. Reed." "I'm coming too," Josie said firmly, already reaching for her shawl. "Mrs. Reed, in your condition," Joe began. "My condition doesn't prevent me from sitting a horse, and I won't stay here wondering if my husband is in danger." Josie's tone brooked no argument. "Mr. Thompson can help me saddle Daisy. We'll follow at a pace that's safe for the baby." The men exchanged glances, recognizing the futility of arguing with her. Within minutes, they were mounted and heading north, Josie riding carefully on Daisy with Mr. Thompson beside her, while Pastor Evans, the councilman, and Joe rode ahead at a faster pace. The disputed boundary was a ridge overlooking a natural depression where the spring bubbled up from underground, forming the headwaters of the creek that nourished Reed Ranch. As they approached, Josie could see a group of men on horseback facing off on either side of a partially constructed fence. Rosston sat on Buck, his posture tense but controlled, while across from him, Edwin Hollister gestured emphatically, 5 of his men arrayed behind him. "Legal injunction, Reed," Hollister was saying as Josie and Mr. Thompson drew close enough to hear. "You're trespassing on contested property." "This is my land, Hollister, properly deeded and registered." Rosston's voice was steady. "Your so-called documentation is fabricated and we both know it." Hollister's face reddened. "Are you calling me a liar, Reed?" "I'm calling you desperate. Water's scarce this year, and you're trying to control what you don't rightfully own." The arrival of Pastor Evans, the councilman, and Joe had shifted the balance somewhat, though Hollister's men still outnumbered them. When Hollister spotted Josie, surprise and then calculation crossed his face. "Mrs. Reed, I'm surprised your husband would bring you into such a volatile situation, especially in your condition." "My husband didn't bring me, Mr. Hollister. I came of my own accord to protect what belongs to our family." Josie urged Daisy forward until she was beside Rosston, who shot her a look that mingled exasperation and pride. "Family," Hollister repeated, his gaze moving to Josie's pregnant form. "That's precisely why you should consider my offer, Reed. A growing family needs security, not endless legal battles. I'm prepared to buy your entire spread at a fair price. You could move to Virginia City, open a business, give your wife and child the comforts they deserve." "My wife and child deserve to inherit the land we've worked for," Rosston replied. "And they deserve honest neighbors who respect boundaries." One of Hollister's men moved his hand toward his holster, causing Pastor Evans to speak up sharply. "Gentlemen, surely this matter can be resolved without violence. As men of faith and community, we should seek peaceful solutions." "The peaceful solution is for Reed to accept reality," Hollister snapped. "This case will drag through the courts for years. During that time, this spring will remain off limits to his cattle. How long can your herd survive without adequate water, Reed? How many seasons before you're forced to sell at half what I'm offering now?" Josie, watching the confrontation unfold, suddenly remembered something she'd seen in Rosston's ledgers during the winter. "Mr. Hollister," she said clearly, Are you familiar with Montana Territorial Statute 47 regarding riparian rights? All eyes turned to her in surprise. Hollister frowned. What? The territorial statutes clearly state that water sources originating on one property and flowing naturally to another cannot be fully diverted or blocked by the upstream owner. Even if you were to win your claim to this spring, which you won't, you cannot legally prevent the water from flowing to our land as it has naturally done since, before either of our claims were established. Rosston looked at his wife with undisguised admiration. Mr. Thompson chuckled softly, and the councilman nodded in confirmation. "The lady's right, Hollister," he said. "Even with your injunction, you can't dam or divert the spring entirely. The law requires you to allow reasonable flow to continue downstream." Hollister's face darkened with anger. "This isn't over, Reed, not by a long shot." He jerked his reins, turning his horse. "Tear down that fence," he ordered his men. "We'll approach this differently." As Hollister and his men rode away, Rosston reached for Josie's hand. "How did you know about that statute?" "I read your law books during the winter," Josie explained. "I wanted to understand the legal aspects of ranching. When Mr. Thompson mentioned water rights, I remembered the riparian rights section." Rosston shook his head in wonder. "You are remarkable, Josie Reed." Pastor Evans cleared his throat. "This confrontation has been averted, but I fear Hollister won't give up so easily. You should prepare for a legal battle, Rosston." "We'll be ready," Rosston assured him. "And we're grateful for your support today." "All of you," he added, looking around at the men who had come to their aid. As they rode back to the cabin, Josie felt the baby move vigorously, as if responding to the excitement. Despite the confrontation, she felt a deep sense of belonging and purpose. This land was worth fighting for, not just for its material value, but for what it represented. Their independence, their future, the legacy they would leave their children. That evening, after their visitors had departed with promises of continued support, Rosston and Josie sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. Rosston's arm was around her shoulders, his free hand resting on her belly, feeling their child's movements. "I was terrified when I saw you riding up," he admitted. "If anything had happened to you or the baby." "Nothing did happen," Josie reminded him, "and I couldn't stay behind, not when you were facing Hollister alone." Rosston kissed her temple. "You were magnificent, quoting territorial statutes like a trained lawyer. Did you see Hollister's face?" Josie laughed. "He looked as if he'd bitten into a sour apple. But Rosston, he won't give up easily. What's our next step? I've been thinking about that." Rosston's expression grew serious. "We need to secure our legal position before the case is heard. I'm going to ride to Helena next week to consult with a proper lawyer, one who specializes in land claims." "A wise precaution," Josie agreed. "And while you're gone, I'll review all our documentation, make sure everything is in order." Rosston's arm tightened around her. "We make quite a team, don't we?" "We do." Josie rested her head on his shoulder, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. "When I stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but hope, I never imagined I'd find all of this: a home, purpose, love." "Hope was all I needed," Rosston murmured. "That and you." As darkness settled over Reed Ranch, Josie and Rosston remained on the porch, planning for the challenges ahead, but secure in their unity. Whatever Hollister might throw at them, they would face it together: the mail-order bride who had arrived with nothing but hope, the cowboy who had found in her everything he needed, and the love that had transformed their practical arrangement into a bond strong enough to weather any storm. The legal battle with Hollister consumed much of the summer. As Josie's pregnancy advanced, Rosston shouldered the majority of the work, making trips to Helena to meet with their lawyer and gather evidence to counter Hollister's claims. The case attracted attention throughout the territory, with many small ranchers seeing it as a test of whether wealthy operators like Hollister could use legal maneuvering to swallow up independent homesteads. Public opinion in Virginia City largely supported the Reeds, especially after the local newspaper published an editorial questioning the convenient timing of Hollister's discovered documentation. The editor, a crusty old miner turned journalist, had no love for big cattle interests and delighted in pointing out the suspicious nature of Hollister's claim. Despite the stress of the legal proceedings, life at Reed Ranch continued its steady rhythm. The spring still flowed, though Hollister had stationed men at the boundary to ensure the Reeds didn't encroach on the disputed territory. Rosston had developed an alternate watering system, digging deeper pools along the creek to ensure their cattle had adequate access even if the flow diminished in the late summer heat. July brought scorching temperatures and the final weeks of Josie's pregnancy. Dr. Williams from Virginia City rode out twice to check on her, pronouncing her healthy but advising rest in the heat of the day. Rosston fretted constantly, dividing his attention between ranch work, legal preparations, and caring for his increasingly uncomfortable wife. "I'm fine," Josie insisted one evening as Rosston massaged her swollen feet. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Stop looking at me as if I might shatter. Women have been having babies in remote ranches with the nearest doctor an hour's ride away." Rosston countered, his brow furrowed with concern. "I've arranged for Mrs. Holloway to come stay with us next week. She's delivered dozens of babies over the years." Josie smiled at his planning. "That's a wonderful idea. I'd welcome her company." She shifted, trying to find a comfortable position. "Have you heard anything more about the court date?" "August 15th, Rosston replied. "Our lawyer is confident. Hollister's documentation has inconsistencies that should be obvious to any fair-minded judge." "If the judge is fair-minded," Josie cautioned, "Hollister has influence." "True, but so do we in our way. Half the territory is watching this case. It would be difficult for even a corrupt judge to rule blatantly against the evidence." Josie nodded, her hand moving to her belly as the baby shifted position. "Oh, that was a strong one." Rosston's eyes widened. "Is it time? Should I ride for the doctor?" "No," Josie laughed, taking his hand and placing it where the baby was pushing against her side. "Feel that, just letting us know he's ready to meet us soon." Rosston raised an eyebrow. "You seem certain it's a boy." "Mother's intuition," Josie replied with a smile, "though I'll be equally happy with a daughter, of course." "As will I." Rosston's expression softened as he felt the movements beneath his palm. "Boy or girl, this child will grow up knowing they were wanted and loved from the moment we knew of their existence." 2 days later, as a thunderstorm rolled across the valley, Josie's labor began. Mrs. Holloway, who had arrived just the previous evening, took charge immediately, sending Rosston for hot water and clean linens while she helped Josie walk around the cabin between contractions. "That's it, dear. Keep moving as long as you can," the older woman encouraged. "Helps the baby get into position." Rosston hovered anxiously, trying to be useful without getting in the way. When Josie's water broke and her labor intensified, Mrs. Holloway firmly directed him to the porch. "We'll call if we need you," she said, patting his arm sympathetically. "This is women's work now." The hours that followed were the longest of Rosston's life. He paced the porch as rain pounded the roof, wincing at each cry from inside the cabin. Joe and the other hands kept their distance, understanding the rancher's distress, but offering silent support from the bunkhouse. As evening fell and the storm moved eastward, a new sound cut through the humid air, the unmistakable cry of a newborn. Rosston froze, his heart pounding, until Mrs. Holloway appeared at the door, her face tired but beaming. "Congratulations, Mr. Reed," she said. "You have a healthy son." The world seemed to tilt beneath Rosston's feet as he stumbled into the cabin. In the bedroom, Josie lay propped against pillows, her face flushed and damp with sweat but radiant with joy. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Rosston," she whispered as he approached, "come meet your son." Carefully, reverently, Rosston sat on the edge of the bed and peered at the tiny face nestled against Josie's breast. The baby had a shock of dark hair like his father's, and when he briefly opened his eyes, Josie's clear blue gaze. "He's perfect," Rosston breathed, his finger gently touching his son's miniature hand. "Josie, you're amazing. I don't have words." "I thought we might name him Thomas," Josie said. "After your father." Emotion welled in Rosston's throat. "Thomas Reed. It's a good name, a strong name, Mrs. Holloway discreetly withdrew, leaving the new family to their privacy. Rosston stretched out beside Josie on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, both of them gazing in wonder at the new life they had created. "I love you," Rosston murmured, kissing Josie's temple. "Both of you, more than I knew was possible." "And we love you," Josie replied, leaning into his embrace. "Our protector, our provider, our heart." In that moment, the legal battles and border disputes seemed distant and unimportant. What mattered was here in this room, the family they had become, the love that had grown from their unlikely beginning. As little Thomas Reed slept peacefully in his mother's arms, Rosston made a silent vow to ensure that his son would inherit not just land and cattle, but the values that had brought him and Josie together: courage, honesty, perseverance, and above all, hope. The court date arrived 2 weeks after Thomas's birth. Josie, still recovering but determined to be present, entrusted the baby to Mrs. Holloway's care for the day and accompanied Rosston to Virginia City. The territorial courthouse was packed with spectators, many of whom nodded respectfully to the Reeds as they entered. Hollister and his lawyers sat confidently at one table, while Rosston, Josie, and their attorney, Mr. Daniels from Helena, took the other. Judge Franklin, a stern-looking man with gray side whiskers, surveyed the crowded room with impatience. "This court will come to order," he announced, banging his gavel. "Reed versus Hollister, dispute over land boundaries and water rights. Let's proceed efficiently, gentlemen. I have other cases waiting." The proceedings began with Hollister's lawyer presenting their claim that an 1868 survey had incorrectly placed the boundary line, and that the spring in question rightfully belonged to Hollister's original land grant. He produced yellowed documents that appeared to support this assertion, pointing to signatures and official-looking seals. Mr. Daniels cross-examined Hollister and his surveyor expertly, highlighting inconsistencies in their story. When had these documents been discovered? Why had no claim been made for 8 years? How did they explain the conflicting records in the Territorial Land Office? Hollister's composure began to crack under the persistent questioning. "I've been a generous neighbor," he insisted. "I could have pursued this years ago, but gave Red a chance to establish himself. It's only his stubbornness in refusing reasonable offers that forced this legal action." When it was the Reeds' turn to present their case, Mr. Daniels called Rosston to testify about his purchase of the property, his improvements to the land, and Hollister's previous attempts to buy the disputed section. Then, in a move that surprised even Rosston, he called Josie to the stand. "Mrs. Reed," Mr. Daniels began, "when did you first become aware of Mr. Hollister's interest in your property?" "Josie, composed in a simple but elegant dress that concealed the physical evidence of her recent childbirth, spoke clearly. Shortly after my arrival in Montana last September, Mr. Hollister approached us in town and mentioned his desire to purchase the northern section of our ranch. And did he mention any dispute over the boundary at that time? No, sir. He spoke only of wanting to secure access to the spring for his cattle. He offered to buy the land, not claim it was already his. Mr. Daniels produced a copy of the Virginia City newspaper from the previous October. Mrs. Reed, is this a report of a social gathering at the Hollister residence? Josie examined the paper. Yes, it appears to be an account of a dinner party hosted by Mr. and Mrs. Hollister. Would you please read the highlighted section? Josie Reed aloud. Mr. Hollister spoke enthusiastically of his plans to expand his ranch holdings, expressing particular interest in acquiring the natural spring on the Reed property, which would complete his water access for the eastern pastures. Acquiring, Mrs. Reed. Not reclaiming or securing his rightful property, but acquiring. Would you say that suggests Mr. Hollister himself believed the spring belonged to your ranch at that time? It certainly does, Josie agreed. The courtroom stirred, and Hollister's face darkened with anger. His lawyer jumped up to object, but Judge Franklin waved him down. I'll allow it, the judge said. The newspaper account is relevant to understanding the history of this dispute. The final blow came when Mr. Daniels called an unexpected witness, an elderly man named Samuel Jenkins, who had been the Territorial Land Office clerk in the late 1860s. Mr. Jenkins, Daniels asked, are you familiar with the survey practices of that period? Indeed I am, sir. I processed hundreds of claims and surveys during my tenure. And have you examined the documents presented by Mr. Hollister? Jenkins nodded, putting on spectacles to review the papers again. I have. And while they appear official at first glance, there are several problems. The paper and ink are consistent with documents from that era, but the formatting is wrong. Land Office documents from 1868 used a different header layout. Additionally, the surveyor whose signature appears here, a James Wilson, never worked for the territorial government. I knew all the official surveyors personally. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Hollister's lawyer leaned over to whisper urgently to his client, whose face had gone pale beneath his tan. Judge Franklin examined the documents himself, comparing them with official records Mr. Daniels provided. After several minutes of tense silence, he looked up, his expression severe. This court finds the documents presented by Mr. Hollister to be of questionable authenticity at best and potentially fraudulent at worst. The original survey and deed held by Mr. Reed are determined to be valid and binding. He banged his gavel. The spring and surrounding acreage are rightfully part of Reed Ranch, and all injunctions regarding access are hereby lifted. Cheers erupted from the spectators, quickly silenced by the judge's glare. Furthermore, he continued, this court advises Mr. Hollister that any future harassment or interference with the Reed property may result in additional legal consequences. Case dismissed. Rosston embraced Josie as the courtroom broke into excited conversation. We did it, he whispered against her hair. The ranch is secure. Hollister stormed out without acknowledging them, his lawyer hurrying after him. As the Reeds made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations from friends and neighbors, Mr. Thompson caught Rosston's arm. A word of caution, he said quietly. Hollister doesn't take defeat well. You might want to be extra vigilant for a while. Rosston nodded, sobering. We'll be careful. Thank you for the warning. Mrs. Holloway was waiting at the boarding house with baby Thomas, who had slept peacefully through the proceedings that would secure his inheritance. As Josie took her son in her arms, she felt a profound sense of completion. This was what they had fought for, not just land and water rights, but the future represented by the tiny life they had created together. The ride back to the ranch was jubilant, despite their awareness of potential retaliation from Hollister. Friends accompanied them part of the way, creating a celebratory procession that drew curious looks from passers-by. When they finally reached Reed Ranch, Rosston carried Josie and Thomas across the threshold like a new bride and child, symbolically beginning their life together afresh. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," he said, kissing her softly. "Welcome home, Thomas Reed." As expected, Hollister did not take his defeat gracefully. In the weeks that followed the court case, there were incidents: a section of fence mysteriously cut, allowing cattle to wander, tracks of riders near the spring at night, a dead coyote left on their porch as a warning. Rosston increased security, hiring 2 hands to stay on through the winter and establishing night patrols during vulnerable periods. But as autumn painted the valley in gold and crimson, Hollister's harassment gradually diminished. Rumor had it that his financial backers in Helena were displeased with the negative publicity the court case had generated, and his attention had shifted to political ambitions that required a more respectable public image. By the time Thomas was 3 months old, life at Reed Ranch had settled into a new normal. The baby thrived, growing stronger each day, his curious eyes taking in the world around him. Josie had recovered fully from childbirth and divided her time between caring for Thomas and managing the household. Rosston, watching his wife nurse their son in the rocking chair by the fire, thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Josie asked, noticing his contemplative gaze. "How lucky I am," Rosston replied, kneeling beside the chair to stroke Thomas's downy head. "A year ago I was a solitary man with land but no real home. Now I have everything that matters, as do I." Josie smiled down at their son. "From a mail-order bride with nothing but hope to this, a family, a purpose, a place that's truly ours." "Hope was all we needed," Rosston said, echoing the words he'd spoken when they first met. "That and each other." As winter settled once more over Reed Ranch, bringing with it the peaceful isolation of snow-covered fields and long evenings by the fire, Josie and Rosston faced the future with confidence. Their love, born from practical necessity but nurtured by mutual respect and shared dreams, had proven stronger than the challenges they had faced together. And little Thomas, sleeping peacefully in the cradle his father had crafted, was the living embodiment of that love, a new generation to carry forward the legacy they were building, one day at a time, in the wild and beautiful Montana territory. 5 years later, 1881, the summer sun beat down on the expanded homestead of Reed Ranch as Josie hung laundry on the line, pausing to wipe her brow with the back of her hand. From the corral came the sound of laughter as Rosston supervised 4-year-old Thomas's riding lesson on a gentle pony. Beside Josie, 2-year-old Margaret toddled after butterflies, her dark curls bouncing with each determined step. "Careful, Maggie," Josie called as the little girl strayed too close to the chicken coop. "Remember what happened last time you bothered the hens." Maggie giggled, changing course to follow a grasshopper instead. Her fearlessness was a constant source of both pride and anxiety for her parents at 2. She already showed signs of the same determination that had brought Josie across the country to an uncertain future. The ranch had prospered in the 5 years since the court battle with Hollister. The house had been expanded again, now boasting 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The herd had grown to over 300 head, and Rosston had added sheep to diversify their operation. Two of the original hands, Joe and Miguel, had become permanent fixtures, with Joe building a small cabin on the property after marrying a widow from Virginia City. Hollister had eventually abandoned his attempts to acquire the spring, focusing his ambitions eastward where larger ranches were consolidating. His political aspirations had been thwarted when rumors of the fraudulent documents in the Reed case surfaced during his campaign for territorial representative, resulting in a decisive defeat at the polls. Virginia City itself had changed as well. The railroad had finally reached the area, bringing new settlers and commercial opportunities. The general store now occupied a larger building. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house had been expanded to include a proper restaurant, and a small school had opened on the edge of town. Josie had helped establish a lending library in a corner of the schoolhouse, donating books and volunteering time to ensure that frontier children had access to literature and learning. As Josie pinned the last of the sheets to the line, she caught sight of a wagon approaching along the main road. She shaded her eyes, recognizing the Thompsons' delivery wagon from the general store. "Rosston," she called. "The Thompsons are coming." Rosston lifted Thomas from the pony and set him on the ground. "Go help your mother with Maggie," he instructed, ruffling the boy's dark hair. "I'll see what brings the Thompsons out this way." Thomas ran to Josie, his small face serious with responsibility. "I'll watch Maggie, Mama," he promised, taking his sister's hand. "We'll stay by the porch." "Thank you, Thomas. You're a good brother." Josie gathered her laundry basket and headed toward the house, the children following obediently. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were already climbing down from their wagon when Josie reached the yard. Mrs. Thompson hurried forward with arms outstretched. "Josie, my dear. How those children have grown since I saw them last month. Thomas, you're looking more like your father every day, and Miss Maggie, pretty as a picture in that pinafore." While the women exchanged greetings, Mr. Thompson and Rosston shook hands. "Sorry to intrude on your Saturday," the storekeeper said, "but we've got news from town we thought you'd want to hear right away." "Nothing wrong, I hope?" Rosston asked, leading the way to the porch where Josie had already invited Mrs. Thompson to sit. "Not wrong, no." Mr. Thompson accepted a glass of lemonade from Josie with thanks. "The territorial governor passed through yesterday on his way to Helena, stopped long enough to announce some new appointments and developments." Mrs. Thompson, unable to contain herself, burst in. "They're going to build a proper courthouse in Virginia City, and the governor's appointing new judges for each county. But that's not the big news." She looked meaningfully at her husband. Mr. Thompson grinned. The governor specifically mentioned Raid Ranch in his speech, said it was an example of the kind of independent, family-run operation that built the territory and should be preserved against the big cattle interests. "Seems your court case with Hollister has become something of a legend in legal circles." Josie sat down beside Rosston, surprise evident on her face. "Our case? But that was years ago." "Apparently it set a precedent that's been cited in similar disputes across the territory," Mr. Thompson explained. "Small ranchers against the big operations. And now the governor's establishing a commission to review water rights throughout Montana to prevent the kind of maneuvering Hollister attempted." "That's remarkable," Rosston said, his arms slipping around Josie's shoulders. "Who would have thought our little struggle would have such an impact?" Mrs. Thompson beamed at them. "You two have become something of an inspiration, you know, the mail-order bride and the homesteader who stood up to the cattle baron. People still talk about it, especially newcomers considering similar arrangements." Josie felt her cheeks warm. "We're hardly that dramatic. We've just been living our lives, raising our children, and building something lasting," Mr. Thompson added. "That's what folks admire. You came with nothing but hope, Josie, and look what you and Rosston have created together." The conversation shifted to town news and the children's latest achievements. Thomas proudly showed Mr. Thompson his pony, while Maggie clambered into Mrs. Thompson's lap to play with her necklace. The afternoon sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the yard. As the Thompsons prepared to leave, Mrs. Thompson hesitated, then reached into her basket. "I brought something for you," she said, handling Josie a newspaper. "It's from back East Philadelphia, in fact. Thought you might like to see what's happening in your old home." Josie accepted the paper with a smile. "That's very thoughtful. It's been so long, I sometimes forget I ever lived anywhere but Montana." After the Thompsons had departed, the family settled into their evening routine. Supper was served, the children bathed and put to bed with stories and kisses, the hands fed, and the evening chores completed. Only then did Josie have a moment to examine the Philadelphia newspaper Mrs. Thompson had brought. Sitting on the porch in the lingering twilight, Rosston beside her, she scanned the headlines and society notes. It felt like reading about another world, distant and slightly unreal compared to the solid certainty of her life in Montana. "Anything interesting?" Rosston asked, lighting his pipe. "Just the usual society events and political debates," Josie replied, turning the page. Then she gasped softly. "Oh, what is it?" Josie pointed to a small article near the bottom of the page. "The man I worked for in Philadelphia, Mr. Hargrove, has died. And look, it mentions his son, Walter, the one whose advances cost me my position." She read aloud. "Walter Hargrove, heir to the Hargrove textile fortune, has departed for Europe following allegations of improper behavior toward female employees. Sources indicate that multiple complaints have been filed, forcing his father to remove him from the family business before his death." Rosston's expression hardened. "Sounds like his behavior toward you wasn't an isolated incident." "No, it seems not." Josie folded the paper slowly. "It's strange to think how differently my life might have turned out if he hadn't made those advances. I might never have seen your advertisement, never come to Montana. Never married me," Rosston added quietly. "Never had Thomas and Maggie." Josie reached for his hand. "I can't imagine that life now. It feels like I was always meant to be here, with you, building this ranch, raising our children." Rosston brought her hand to his lips. "You ever regret it? Coming west on the promise of letters from a stranger, leaving civilization for this wild country?" "Not for a moment," Josie replied without hesitation. "I arrived with nothing but hope, but that was exactly what I needed, hope and the courage to reach for a different future." She leaned against his shoulder, gazing out at the land they had fought for and nurtured together. "And you? Do you ever regret sending for a mail-order bride instead of courting one of the local girls?" Rosston chuckled. "You mean like Bessie Williams with her 6 brothers who all threatened to shoot me if I looked at her wrong? Or Agnes Peterson, who couldn't cook anything that didn't taste like shoe leather?" Josie laughed. "I didn't realize your options were so limited." "They were," Rosston confirmed. "But even if every eligible woman in the territory had been lined up at my door, I'd still have chosen you." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You remember what I said when you first arrived? That hope was all I needed too." "I remember. I meant it then, but I didn't fully understand what I was saying. Hope brought you to me, but what you gave me was so much more: a partner who stands beside me in every challenge, a mother who nurtures our children with wisdom and love, a woman whose courage and intelligence humble me daily." Rosston's voice grew husky with emotion. "You are the heart of this ranch, Josie Reed, the heart of our family, the heart of me." Tears pricked behind Josie's eyes at his heartfelt declaration. After 6 years of marriage, Rosston had become more comfortable expressing his feelings, but such eloquence was still rare and precious. "And you," she replied, her voice soft with love, "are the foundation that makes everything else possible. My protector, my partner, the father our children adore." She touched his face gently. "We built this life together, Rosston, from nothing but hope and hard work. And it's more beautiful than anything I could have imagined when I stepped off that stagecoach." The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky as they sat together on the porch of the home they had created. Inside, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. Beyond the house, cattle grazed in the moonlight, the creek flowed steadily from the spring they had defended, and the mountains stood sentinel against the horizon. From such an unlikely beginning, a mail-order bride with nothing but hope. A lonely rancher willing to believe that hope was enough had grown a love as vast and enduring as the Montana sky. As Rosston and Josie Reed held each other in the gathering darkness, they knew with absolute certainty that what they had found together was rarer and more precious than any gold that had ever been mined from the hills around them. A true partnership of hearts, minds, and souls that would endure for all the days of their lives.